Thanks everybody who came here in the amphitheater and all those that I see connected. Thanks very much to the speakers. Ruben Dedecker is talking today, Patrick tomorrow. Ruben is a child really of Ghent University because he did his master's there in computer science and he now works on a PhD. He works on linked data. He teaches linked data in the AI Academy of Belgium. And he's very much connected with the SOLID project for which the Flanders government gave a huge amount of money investing in this idea by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, trying to preserve the individual's autonomy on the web. So it's an opportunity for us to find out more in detail on linked data and SOLID. Ruben, thank you so much.
All right. So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Today I'm going to try to give you a bit of an overview over the SOLID project that we're working on, the linked data that's under the hood, and like a bit of an introduction as well, like how did the web start, what were the problems that were seen, and how is SOLID an answer to these problems. So to start out with, a bit of background information on the web. So the web originated here in 1998. Tim Berners-Lee, he wrote out a proposal. 89, sorry. He wrote out a proposal on information management that he gave to his boss. And that was the origin of the project that became the web. And so why did he do this? It was mostly out of frustration with how things were before the web, right? Before the web, exchanging information was kind of difficult because people had their own machines, their own hardware, ran their own software on top. So if you want to innovate in a space like that, you want to make new applications, you want to do stuff, then you have to ask yourself the question, what are we actually building for, right? Because you cannot just say, I want to make something new. You had to keep in mind, like, which systems are there? What are we going to support? How much time can we put into this? It's a bit like we still have, in the case of apps, for example, if you have an app, do we make an Android app? Do we make an iOS app? Maybe some app for smart devices? Innovation in the space is not as straightforward because you have this, you have this discrepancy between machines and you have to make choices there. And so what the web strives to be here is to be a universal constant in this ecosystem, and it tried to do this through an independence, being independent of many factors. So the idea was you can use the web regardless of what type of hardware or software you're running, and 30 years later we still see this, right? The web runs on your phone, on your desktop, on your laptop, independently of if you're using Apple, or if you're using Microsoft system, if you're using whatever Linux distribution, it does not matter. If you have this browser on your device, you can just go to the web, interact with it, innovate there. And that made developers very free to innovate here because you have this system where everybody can connect to, everybody can see. So if you have to develop, that's a very interesting proposition because you don't have to choose like, what are we going to support? No, if you support the web, then your reach will be practically unlimited, at least today. And you have there these standards under the hood that provide you with this interoperability, so you don't have to handle that yourself. You just throw your stuff on the web, and the web handles the interoperability for you. So this web was a real universal constant here, and on this web, what systems before the web tried to do was to have very rigid systems where if you click on a link, right, you go to a page. But if you want to scale that, you run into problems, right? Because who's going to manage what's on the other side? And I think we've all seen some nice 404s in our life. And that's just inherently part of the web's design as well. Because if you want it to scale and you want it to be free for people to put stuff on, to innovate on and do stuff, then eventually things are going to break. And by now, a lot of things have already broken in the past 30 years. But that's just part of the design, right? Because if you want to scale, then if you break your things, that's not really a problem because you cannot really break the entire web. The web will just go on with your links as a 404. And if somebody linked to your page and left a comment and your page is gone, well, the comment is still there and the page that it links to is gone. But that's just inherently part of a smart design for creating this universal system. And then in 1993, the software, the stuff behind the web that was developed here in CERN was released royalty-free. You were free to use it, to browse the web, to set up your own web server, host your own stuff on the web. And that's also what made it so enticing, because if you wanted to innovate, you can reach everyone, and I don't really have to pay for it, right? I just have to set up my my server, and it's done. It's on the web. People can reach it. It's super easy. So that's really this universality that made it so easy to work with, and it made it a no-brainer to use in your as your platform. So we saw here permissionless innovation at a global scale, right? Because anyone can build anything for any reason, and these technologies are open. You can build whatever, and people have built whatever on there. You can just join and launch this new idea that you have. And together with that also comes the free expression, right? If you put something on the web and I disagree with that, well, I just put on my own blog and I say, this is total bullshit what you're doing. And then I can link to your blog and or link to your website or your blog or whatever that you have online. And then people can come to my blog and see, what is this that he's talking about? And by following these links, you get this easy interaction. So you can link between these opinions. And then as time progressed, Web 2 ideas started to gain some ground because, well, not everybody is going to put on their own website and connect it to the web, right? Sometimes you just want ease of use, and these platforms saw that, and they said, like, hey, if we have people just leave their comments here, right, all in this platform, and maybe link to places outside of this platform, then it's a lot easier. It's a better user experience. So this transitioned the user from just mainly consuming the web, right, going to a web page, and reading what's on there, to also interacting with the web. You leave a comment here, you leave a like there, you do something with something. The possibilities that it enabled were practically endless. And as a result, what did we get? Well, we got a lot of stuff, right? And everybody knows that we got a lot of stuff. And not only for a select demographic, we got stuff for everyone, right? If you're young and you want to argue with people across the world, well, you use Reddit. If you have to move and you don't want to wait for a taxi, well, maybe there's an Uber on the way. If you want to spend your evening doing nothing productive, you open YouTube, right? If you have some homework assignment that needs finishing by the next day, just pull up some Wikipedia. And if you want to keep your kids happy, let them play some Flash games online, right? There's something for everybody, and this creativity was in all facets of the web, all different directions. But they all became their own big things, and the web enabled everyone just to connect with that and to play along, to interact, to consume. So we have now painted a small overview. We have like this universal system, the web, everybody can connect, you can put your own stuff in there. There's a lot of creativity, a lot of easy interactions there, but this universality is not always, there are some threats on the web that threaten the universality itself. So, and that started even before my time. I'm from '96, so even before there, if you want to connect with the web, you have to go through some piece of software, namely the browser, and then people say, like, hey, if we can have some control over this entry point, that might be good for us in the future, right? We might be able to do some advertising or sell our product, they can do whatever they want, and it's a very, it's a thing that the companies really wanted to have. So you still see it today. Chrome is by far the biggest browser, but you still have the Brave browser, for example, as a new thing. Recently, they're pushing Opera GX, other browsers. There's still a lot of choice there, and there's still competition there in that market, even a small 30 years later. In addition, Web 2.0 had some very nice interactions and stuff, but that came at a cost somewhere, because now every website started to have their login and register buttons, and that's where the origins of, which password was it again that I used for this website, and what password did I use for the other websites? Because if you wanted to leave a comment on the website, well, where does the comment have to go, right? It has to go into some database, and then they have to remember, that was you that wrote that comment, and if you write another one, should be the same account, so you have to start registering everywhere, having everything come to your mail, every website started having their own accounts. And then one step further, once the mobile space became more prevalent, then every company suddenly had their app, and they're like, hey, yeah, it's all fun and good that you're watching it in the browser, but maybe you would like to try our app ecosystem, right? So, and if you do that, then you're essentially going off the web into an app ecosystem, and you've probably seen it. If you click on a link there, then the app provides you with a very bare bones web browser from themselves, right, to show you some content. But like, they essentially pull you off the web into their own ecosystem, where they have control, right? They control the ads, they control the whole system there. So for companies, this is a nice prospect. But for you as a user of the web, you kind of lose the whole connectivity, the whole universality, right? Your links, you're not in the browser anymore, so your links have to go through some other way to get resolved. You lose that universality a bit. And as a result of this, well, our data has kind of become stuck a bit, because you used to have people doing their own blogs, right? But if you have to do your own blog, well, you have to do your own layout as well. And people tend to be kind of lazy in that aspect. And you had to publish it somewhere online. And, well, Facebook and Twitter, these platforms are just so easy to use, right? You just create your account. You put some comment in there. You put your blog in there. It's easy, so it's a great user experience. But in the end, you kind of lose control of your data, because now this becomes like a part of Facebook and not really a part of the web anymore. Certainly now, where if you Google something and you want to click the link to the Facebook, you don't have an account, so you cannot really participate in the space. And because the user experience is so great, they pull in a lot of people. And then, like, if you have your own personal blog, you'll be like, if you want to expand your reach, you kind of have to use Facebook then, or you have to use these other systems, because you want your blog to reach people, right? So then you have like separately a link on Facebook there and a link on Twitter maybe, and then you have some comments on Facebook and some comments there, and maybe some comments in the original blog, and things tend to get a bit scattered on certain platforms, and you lose control, and this data becomes a bit scattered, and there's not really any consistency, or this universality there is long gone by then. And so your data has essentially oftentimes become stuck in data silos, and these are not centered around you. No, these silos are centered around the platform that you're using online, right? Inside the Facebook platform, all their data is centered around them, and inside Twitter, same thing. And you as a user, you have to just keep track of where you wrote what and what your accounts were, and have to keep track of that whole all those ecosystems yourself. So there we end up with the slide that many of you probably have already seen if you've ever watched presentations in the web context, where you have the walled gardens of the web, where you have to move either data of people, right? Inside these platforms, it's all a nice garden, right? You have these nice experiences, nice user interfaces. But if you want to interact with these things on the web, well, either you have to pull people into your platform, right? If you have your Facebook event, well, if the other person is not on Facebook, you can't really do a lot there. And if somebody else is using another platform, well, that event that's on Facebook, it's really difficult to pull that data over from there into some other system, right? Because, it's not the same format, it's all different, and those things are just built for the platform and not for the universality of the web. And that leads to these walled gardens. And so, ironically, where the web gave you this permissionless innovation and allowed you to really embrace this universality and connect with everyone, it allowed for the building of platforms that just went against that message and just built their own things on the web. And in this example, there was an article in The Guardian that laid this out and nicely and said, the way that Facebook profited from the web, right? Because everybody could reach it. They can use their own search engine, like, oh, social network, oh, maybe I want to participate, or they know people, and through the web they can connect with their web page. And once they get stuck in the ecosystem, then they're like, oh, no, this is our user base now, huh? And if you want to reach this user base, sorry, with your application or your new ID, well, then you have to play according to our rules, right? Not according to the rules of the web. So this innovation becomes stuck in these platforms instead of on this web scale. And yeah, just as an example, like how dependent are you, for example, on the Google ecosystem? Because we tend to forget, like, we browse to something, we're still on the web, but like oftentimes you're in these ecosystems, these platforms, even without realizing it yourself. Because I myself am still using like 10 of these things on a daily basis. So certainly Google Drive is very popular nowadays as well, but like that's something that's inside this ecosystem, and if you want to link and stuff, well, you can, I think, in Google Drive, but you have these other things as well, like the OneDrives and other stuff, because they're all copying each other, right? Because this innovation is stuck in this one platform. We have to copy it then in another platform to be able to compete there. So in any case, these platforms, they create a difficult ecosystem to innovate in, and they really control a lot of data and what you can do on the web. And so to finish this, I saw in a post in The Guardian from this weekend, from 2 days ago, that there was an article there where they touch the same points and say, again, touch the same points of that the rule one is to acquire large numbers of users and keep them in your ecosystem and make them dependent, and then they will pull other users in, so you kind of have to try to grow your user base as fast as possible. And these systems are indeed not interoperable, because if you have your friends on Facebook, well, you cannot really pull those friends out of Facebook and put them in your other ecosystems right now. This is data that's kind of inherently tied to Facebook. You might be able to get your photos out, but there's a lot of stuff there as well that's just hard stuck in those platforms and that you cannot really work with. So this is a bit the context that we're working in now. So you had this universality that allowed this innovation, and then you had these platforms that started to grow, more users interacting, pulling in other users, and you start to get a bit of centralization around those bigger platforms, those bigger ecosystems, and the innovation became a bit stuck inside those platforms instead of on the web. And so that's where the Solid project comes in, right? It's a bit of an attempt at a course correction, like if we want to do it differently, right? Because if you want users to interact, right? But to allow users to interact, well, you have to store these interactions somewhere, and then you have those registrations. So it's kind of, if you want to develop for the web now, you kind of become a small platform with your own ecosystem. Like how can we design for a web that can get rid of dispariting? And that's a bit where the Solid project comes in. So it's a project that's spearheaded by Tim Berners-Lee, so the same person that invented the web is now also at the head of the Solid project, and it's an attempt at getting back that control that these large platforms now have gotten in hand on your data, and it's a way of building web applications, right? So it's a way of how can we now build these web applications without having to resort to this platform thinking? How can we really build applications for the open web? And take this universality of web to heart. And to do that, it relies mainly on existing W3C standards. So as much as possible, it tries to rely on open standards, things that have been built on the web. It's not a new web, so it's not like it changed. It's a layer on top. It builds on top of that using ideas that allow you to build for the open web. So if we want to do this, we have to look at it from two sides. So first, we're going to talk about separating applications and data. So that's the big point. And then, secondly, we're going to talk about what the Solid pod does there and how it tries to enable you to do this. So first, the idea of separation and of application and data is really at the heart of the project. So again, typical platforms now, they have this inseparability, right? You have your application and your data. If we want to access our data, well, then we use the app. And if we want to use the app, well, the app is tied to its own backend, so your data will be stored in that backend, right? It's a clear-cut thing. The app, the backend, they're inseparably tied to each other. What we want is, if we want to build for the web, we want to enable choice for the user, right? I have this application, all right, you interact, you create some data. Now what do you want to do with it, right? We want to give that choice back to you, like allow them to store their data in some place that they want, right? And this might be a bit difficult, like, how are we going to achieve this? But we'll get to that. So we want to give our data the portability that things on the web, used to have, like this open system where you can connect things, you can store things where you like it. We want to give that back to our data on the web as well. So from a user control, right, if we have our data space and we have these applications, we want all these applications to be able to interact with our data, right? You probably had cases where you had like your Google Calendar and your Microsoft Calendar, and those things sometimes don't sync all that well. And you have these two different spaces, but why is the question, right? Is your data, these are your events, your meetings, your stuff, they could easily be kept together in one point. Same for your contacts, your friends, all these kinds of things. You've probably got tons of places where you hold contact information and stuff. All that could be gathered in one place, and if you have then different applications, well, they can all work with the same context, right? If I add a contact in one application, I might or might not want to use that contact in another application. These are choices that you can make, and these are things that you can build applications for. But currently, you cannot, because this data is stuck in separate places. But if you can pool this into one place, then you can, multiple interlinked places at least, then you can build applications that allow you to use this, this place where your data is stored to really allow for this interconnectivity. So from a user perspective, this is positive, right? You can store your data somewhere, and you can build apps that can interact with the same data, so you don't have to do stuff again, and you can create much nicer integrations, because you can use stuff that comes from somewhere else. So, for example, in terms of a supermarket, the supermarket often has their card, right? Like, you want some nice deals, you have your card, you give your name and your address, right? And I don't know if you've rented a place sometimes, but chances are that you get the advertisement from the person before you, or even the person before that, because they move, but their address information might be in 5-6 different places that they might even forget, because they move and they don't use the same store anymore. And those advertisements keep coming in because the store doesn't know, right? You didn't tell them, like, hey, I moved somewhere else, and they're not up to date because your data is scattered, and you don't really know anymore where you've put these pieces into place. So if you have your data pod and you say, like, hey, you can view this, and then you decide to move and you change this thing, it might say, hey, should I keep people up to date? And you might say, yeah, I still want advertisements. Or you might say, no, I'm not going to use that store anymore, so I just cancel my information that I have there. I say, like, throw that information away. I'm not a client anymore, so you shouldn't be using my data anymore. So it gives you some nice incentives there. And on the other hand, the store also has information about you, because you might buy some things there. And this information might be valuable for you, because what are you spending your money on in the store? You might forget, and you could build an app for that keeps track of what you're buying at what store, for example. So you have this exchange of information from the store to you, from you to the store, and you can both benefit from this interaction of data exchange. And so from an application perspective, if we can achieve this, well, your innovation space becomes much bigger, because now, well, you have nice innovation on the web, but most of the time, if you see innovation, it's either it comes from the large platforms, or it's bought up by the large platforms, because then they can integrate it and they can have their nice web ecosystems where they can do a lot of innovative stuff and keep people in there. But if you're a new player on the web, well, what can you do? You don't have all these amounts of data. So if we can get people to keep track of their own data, they might say, you know what, I gave this information to Facebook, why should I not just give it to you? But I don't really want to start all over and do all these things again. But if I can somehow access this or link this or give you access to it somehow, well, then you can reuse it and you can build your user space a lot more quickly. And on the other hand, the user can also keep track, like, where did I put my information? And maybe you say, well, I don't really use Facebook anymore, so I'll just pull that stuff away from there, for example. It really gives you, as a user, more control, and for newer challengers in the space, it's a lot easier to get access to this data and to more users on the web. And that's where the solid pod concept comes in, because that's all a nice story, but the thing is, if we have these interactions on the web, if we want to separate this data and these applications, this data has to go somewhere, right? That's probably the thing you've been asking, like, but where does the data go then? So for this, the user has to have some kind of space on the web where you can direct this data to, for applications and yourself to use it in the web space. And that's a bit the premise of the solid pod, right? So the solid pod aims to be this data space for you, where you can store your interactions, your own things on the web. Like people are using Google Drive nowadays very often. If you have your documents, that can go in there as well. If you have your music, like these tracks I really like, these are my playlists that I use on Spotify, for example. All this information, if you can get access to it, you can store it in there, and you can make it available. You can share it with other people, you can share it with other apps. So this is really a space for you on the web where you can store and manage and share and do stuff with your data. And you say, well, we want this web interoperability to also be present there in that space. So again, Solid builds on these existing web standards, and these standards cover the things like how do data pods interact with each other, how do applications interact with these data pods, how is identity managed, because again, remember the register and login buttons that you had on these websites? Well, we have to be able to identify you on the web, like who are you? So these standards cover this as well. And because of this, you can have this whole interoperable ecosystem, again, based on a small set of standards that enable these interactions. And using this, again, you can put whatever data in there. You can put your profile, your media, your comments, your likes, all the things that are now in these platforms. You can pull there. You can have your Twitter likes, your Facebook likes, your stars on Instagram, whatever that your interactions are, you can store them there and you can pull them together. And you control which applications can access that, because you might say, you know what, my Facebook likes, they should only be visible on Facebook. Well, that's all right. You can pull them in and you can say, well, they're only for Facebook, and that's perfectly fine. But if you change your mind later, well, you already have access to them and you can share them with somewhere else. So the goal is to give you this control that you want and that can be provided, and enable you to change your mind later and really have control there. And applications can deliver a more integrated experience because they might be able to link to stuff on different spaces, right? You have all these likes, but things do not have to be contained in one ecosystem anymore for these likes to work. These likes might point to anywhere on the web. So you can have that web scale back in your data without being restricted to a certain platform. They might integrate sources from contacts of you. You might say, hey, I have this book application and I have my list of books. Hey, Patrick, can I use your list of books, right? For example, will you give me access on my app to use your list of books, and then I might be able to do something with that, like, hey, these books are similar and Patrick has read them and recommended them. Why don't you try that? So you can have these interactions between these connections that you can make in this data. And on that, the Solid does not really restrict you in what type of apps you can build. Any platform that you can build now, well, you can build that with Solid, but the difference is, instead of this data going to a single backend or their server space, whatever, it goes to your place, and it can incorporate data from outside sources as well. And oftentimes you, as a person, you don't need connections with the whole world, right? No, I just want connections with my social circle. Well, in that case, maybe the amount of data that we have to pull for that is not that big. So it allows you to build these apps for the web, and and pull your data from everywhere to make these things happen and to give you a larger data space to work over. And these apps can build from many sources. Like if I make a post somewhere and there's likes on there, well, these likes, you store your own likes, right? So you might say, hey, I like this, I'll give you a pointer to where I keep my like, and you might say, hey, I got an extra like on this. And then you might have like, 100 likes or more. And if somebody wants to check this, like, hey, do these likes, are these correct likes? Well, maybe if these likes are linked, you say, hey, my like is here, well, you can go check if these likes are actually there. If you have comments, like I want to make a comment on your website, even like not specific post, I say, this is a nice website. I might store this comment with me and I might say, hey, if you want, you can link this data on your website to show my comment somehow if you have some comment-enabled application that shows you comments on certain websites or on certain things in a website. So you can really link stuff together that you couldn't do before. There's a lot of options and a lot of interconnectivity, and that's the key. We want this data to be linkable on a web scale, because now data is linkable in a platform scale, right? You can click through links in Facebook and it will show you all around the place. You can click links in Reddit, show you all around the place. But we want this interlinking between this data to go back to a web scale and get out of that platform thinking of, interlinking is here, innovation is here, and that's where we keep it contained. No, we want to pull this interconnectivity of data back out into a web scale and allow you to make these direct connections, right? I know my colleague Patrick. I do not specifically know him on Facebook. I do not specifically know him on Twitter. I just know the guy, and if you want to use that data, well, you can, or maybe you can't. I will decide if you can. But that's the kind of interconnectivity that we want to create there. And to do a final point here, if you want to allow such a big network of data, well, it might become difficult to trust data, right? Because I might say, hey, Patrick has this name, for example, but no, that's not true. But Patrick's Patrick, and he can have his own data. So if you want to do that, there's some, you have to keep track of where your data comes from, right? Like, who said that? Oh, yeah, Patrick said that. Oh, that'll be fine. Or either you don't care and you say, whatever, I'll take whatever I get. But maybe you want to check your sources. And in this space, there's also added value in verification, right? Because if you know where data comes from, if you get a signature, like Patrick gives me some piece of information and he signs it and I pass it on and it gets passed on, well, at the end, someone might be like, hey, where does this come from? It originated with Patrick and his signature checks out. Well, that's good enough for me. Like, there's also this added value there in being able to verify, because now you pull some information from Facebook and you're like, it comes from their API. It will probably be fine. But in this case, you can let individual people or organizations sign stuff like, hey, you worked here for 10 hours, I can sign this, I can give you this. Or, you are a good employee for the last 3 years, I can sign this. You can put this in your data pod. If a job seeker is like, does this check out? Well, they can verify the signature and be like, all right, well, that checks out. This is correct information. Or not. It's something that can enable you. It's not a core requirement. It's just something to think about when you're thinking in that space. So now that we have that premise, how can we make that a possibility? Because again, interlinking data is all fine and well, but if you think about your normal data that you get back from a web API, if you ask server, can I get this part of the data? Well, then you have to go read some documentation. Yeah, which fields will I get back? All right, and I can get this data, and then I have the context because they put it in their documentation somewhere. But you're like, no, I get some data from here, some data from there. I'll get some data from everywhere, right? Instead of just one backend, I want to connect with a lot of data pods and pull some data out of there. It might even be data that I haven't written myself. Our data needs to be able to scale to this web, right? Because if we want to pull it out of the platforms and into the web, well, if we don't change what it is, well, then it will not work on a web scale. We need to allow our data to scale for us. And this interoperability challenge is solved through linked data again, which is again something coined by Tim Berners-Lee. So that's a triple for him. But if we all store our data, so how do we connect it to others? If one application shares some data with me, another application wants to reuse that maybe, how can that work? And if we want to integrate from multiple places, how can we enable that? That's where this linked data comes in. If I want to like a blog, maybe I don't really want to like it on Facebook. Does the blog even have a Facebook page? I don't know. Do I want to like it on Twitter? Probably not. On Tumblr, I don't even have a Tumblr, so no. I just want to like that blog. And if you want to use that I like that blog, well, that's all the better for you. But I just want to like it on the web, and that's the premise. So if I want to like your blog, well, then I have to connect myself to that blog. So in this case, me, the actor that creates the like, this is my web ID, this spot.rubendedecker.be/profile/car. That's my identifier on the web that I decide to use. So I say, I like the object, this blog. And these things, as you can see, are URIs. So that's the web-enabled thing there. You can directly navigate to these places. So I can, that's F12. I can show you. So if I dereference my web ID, well, I get some set of data. And if I dereference Ruben's blog, I get this nice blog that I like. But if you go look under the hood, I know I'm going a bit quick, but it's just for demonstration, there's all this data embedded in this website. So what I'm doing is just saying like, I connect myself to this blog with this like, but if you then dereference this, you can find more information there. So these URLs, they're instead of like internal identifiers, they're the identifiers for the web, and they allow you to identify things on the web. So this like should also have a universal meaning, right? Because if I say like, am I using a small letter? Am I using a capital L? Somebody from another language will use their own thing. If you have email, is it with a dash, without a dash, using capital letters or not? It becomes a mess, right? So we want to use identifiers for these concepts as well. And like in this case, we have this contact, the activity streams, and that all these things, this actor, this object is published. This is not just that string, it's the activity stream, the w3.org/ns/activity streams #actor. So these things themselves are URIs as well. And if you want to know, well, what does a like actually mean? Well, if you dereference that URI, you should get to the ontology that tells you, well, this is what a like means, for example. And in and of itself, if everybody uses their own ontology, well, that space is not super interoperable, right? Because it's just like if you didn't have URIs because everybody uses their own thing. But once people say, hey, that's actually a good idea, I'll just reuse that. Once you start pulling together more people using the same vocabularies, speaking the same language, so to speak, then that language becomes more important, becomes more, prevalent on the web, and more people are likely to use that language. Same thing in real life, people talk English. Why? It's a useful language to communicate with other people. So if you can get these ontologies to be popular enough, or in your own space, they don't have to be popular across the web, but maybe in your field you have these kinds of concepts that have some popular vocabularies, well, people will be more likely to reuse them. And there you really get this power of interconnectivity that if I say I have a like and you say, I know that one, I also use these for my like. So then this data really starts to connect with this universal meaning behind these properties. And as a third part, I can easily combine this, because if I'm Ruben Verborg and I have this blog, well, I get a like from me, from Ruben Dedecker, I get a like from Patrick, I get a like from somewhere else, and I can pool this data. I can show this, I can easily combine this, and I can work with this, because this is not just random data I get from somewhere. These are identifiers, these are triples. Well, I'll show you in the next slide. But I can use this data, I can use this combined data together, and I can really start doing some fun things with that. So if we take that from like a graph perspective, say this blue thing is on my pod, that's my web ID, my identifier on the web. And then in the orange, I have Ruben Verborg, so my promoter's blog, and that blog has the author Ruben Verborg. This might be some data that's on his pod. This might be just a website that he put online. This data might come from anywhere. In any case, I say, I do an interaction in some application, some solid applications, say, I like this blog. I want to give this blog a like. It might be an application that just allows you to do a like on one URI. Could be whatever. So there, this like gets added to my pod, and now I have this nice interlinking. I have, this like connects me to this blog, and if I find this blog, this blog has an author, Ruben Verborg. Hey, but I know Ruben Verborg. So then I might say, I know this person, I want to add that information as well. So I might use some other application that allows you to make connections, and I make a connection to Ruben Verborg. And if you keep having different applications, adding different relations of data to your pod, you get this nice graph of data where you can just follow your nose through it, and you say like, we have this like to a blog, and then this other person, but he also knows that other person, and your data is not like this nice tree structure. Your data is this messy graph that contains all types of relations, but that you can do fun stuff with as an application, and that you can get interesting insights out of. So the key takeaway there is what we're trying to do is take advantage of this web, right? We're trying to give users a space on the web to put their data. We're trying to take the advantages of this web also into our data with these identifiers that can be reused by applications and other people. And if we do that, well, in Flanders we have now a governance project that's interested in this, like how can we get ourselves and our people up to speed with these new evolutions for the web. So we have a big research project there into how we can use Solid in different facets of the ecosystem, the data ecosystem in Flanders. We also have pop-ups in the industry, like new companies that try to say, this is a nice incentive. And for us, it's also easy, because if we can keep the data with the user and say, we don't really store it ourselves, we just use it to provide you a service, then we don't need to think that much about GDPR compliance and other stuff. So there's some incentives from multiple sides there, and some initiatives from multiple sides to check, like, hey, how can we make this work? Well, what can we do here? How can we progress this? So in Flanders, this is becoming quite a big thing. But you can also just do it yourself, right? Because this is just my personal web page that I use. So I have some information here. I have some of my GitHub links, but this website is actually live. It's just the front for my data. Like, this is my profile, and all my information is available as data on my profile. And this website just pulls some information from my profile. Be like, what is your profile image? It's this link. Well, I'll just pull that link into my website. And if I change my profile link on some other website, well, if this app has access to my profile, well, then this will be updated as well, right? Because you can have these nice interactions between stuff there. And here you see, well, I've hidden some things now because you are not authorized to see some of my information. But if you give me your URI and I say, you know what, I'll add you to the people who can see this part of my information, well, if you authorize, bam, suddenly this information becomes visible to you. Because this website is, in fact, also a Solid-enabled website. You can log in there, and you can authenticate yourself and say, like, hey, I'm this person, and Ruben has given me access to his data, and my pod will say, yeah, that's correct. Here you go. Feel free to use this data. So you have this control. You can give people access. You can give the agents access. I have this calendar agent that says what my meetings are for the next day. Well, I can just give it access, but maybe I won't let it see every data. I'll just give it some obfuscated thing that says I'm busy somewhere between there and there. And you can build these nice interactions on top of your data. Does not all have to be data. For example, this presentation is just hosted on the web on my Solid pod. So if we look at this, well, we get the whole presentation again in this presentation, because it's just web enabled, so you can put it in an iframe, you can link it, you can share it, you can add your like to it and say, yeah, that was a pretty good presentation. And there's no Facebook or something that should allow you to put a like on it. No, you can just put a like on it and put it in your own data space and say, like, hey, I found this cool, I like it. So the power there is really in your hands. And well, this is annoying because this UI messes up from time to time. All right, because it is data, you can also do queries and stuff on it. Now, what I'm going to query now is public data, so that's things that people have made public for everyone. So I can say, you know, on my pod, I know some people, and if you could give me the name of those people, that would be nice. But just for clarification, I do not really have this name in my pod. These names are in their pod, so that's their data. If they change their name, if I keep their name stored locally and they would change their name, well, my data is out of date. I do not want that. I just point you to their identifier and say, you know what? I want the names that come from their identifier because I like my data up to date. And so what you'll see here is a query that does not stop because it's just traversing links. It's saying like, who are your friends? It will go to their spaces. So you see here it's requesting the data spaces from other people in real time, just following their nose through this whole data graph and then looking, hey, do you have a name? And returning this to my query engine. So I can build social network-like features just purely on data itself. I do not have to have some nice backend and think about all these kinds of stuff. No, it's just like two links. I have their connection with me, the nose connection, and I have their FOV name. And then I might find them and say, like, who do these people know? And I might let the query go further, and I might take a look at my local network, like, what's all the connections between people here? If they put it public, if they say, like, yeah, you can see that stuff, that's all right. I might be able to request access somehow or do some other stuff, but everything that is public or made available to you, yeah, you can do pretty fun stuff with that. So that brings me to this, like, it's a nice thing to ask yourself, like, how does your data empower you? Because on these platforms, well, you have these nice integrations, these nice systems, but can't your data do more stuff for you? Like, can't we pull this any further? And that's what we're trying to achieve, and that was what this talk was about. So thank you all for your attention.
Great. So, Ruben, thank you very much. You had a lot of material, but you speak fast. So, several comments, and I would have, but it is wonderful to have a few, if you have any in the room, because I am all going back immediately to Zoom to see if there are any questions from the remote connected listeners. And it's delightful to see that I published it on the Gitter channel of the Solid OS, the developers of the Solid operating system, where Tim Berners-Lee actively develops as well. And there are many people connected, so many people may have questions. So please, in the room, if you have something, click on your microphone for the recording. Thank you.
Is it this? Okay. Well, I think the obvious question is, what if your podcast compromised?
So you mean if someone else can log into your pod?
And yeah, or for anonymous users like, I don't know, journalists in some countries.
I'll just jump in on that in terms of anonymity. The thing is, why you have these linkings. So what I might be able to do is, like, I say I have another pod here with another web ID, anonymous user 257, for example, and I might create a separate data space there that's just for that anonymous user. And if I say, like, in my main pod, I also want to use that data. Well, I might just link to that data and give my main user access there, for example. But these links are one way, so I guess that would be the most straightforward thing, is just like say, and also because Solid is a very open standard, you could just like copy a part of your data that you want to be in that user and say like everything that I need for that I can store there, because the goal is that you have control about what links to what, and if you say like these things should definitely not link back to me, well, host them in a separate space, keep them separated, and like that you can still use the interconnectivity of that space without having links go back to you. So I think in terms of anonymity, that would be the most straightforward thing. Does that answer the question, or you have?
Well, I think it's probably part of the of the answer, but I think it opens up a kind of a difficult situation, because if you can even if you put all your data there,
mm-hmm.
I mean you have access to all your data,
yeah.
so if also the anonymous data or whatever,
mm-hmm.
so it becomes a risky business.
Yeah. So, well, I'll tell you in Flanders how they're tackling it now is like they have your stuff. You can link to there, but they might be able to. At first, they'll be able to control who this data gets shared with. So they'll have their own space for you that you can link to, but that they'll control which applications are allowed to interact with that. So only government applications, for example. And the second thing is there, like maybe. You know what matters is the verification there, because I might have some data here, but like if this isn't verified government data, then what use is it to you if you can't? Well, it might be compromising, but you know it doesn't have the stamp of this is an official government document, so it might have less value there. And then the government might say, like, if you want this verification, well, then you first have to come to me, and I'll have to audit you and do these kinds of things before we will verify any information for you. So you have different pathways there. That you can take. Now, yeah, of course, creating one big space where you are in control can lead you to give control to your data, but I think people now also don't realize often how much of their data they're giving access to. And if you have it in your own space, you can keep track of who you gave access to what, right? You can have these receipts like, at this timestamp I gave this application access to this, at this timestamp I gave this application access to this, and you might find a receipt that you didn't want, and be like, where is this coming from? You know, what's happening here? And you might discover a lot faster as well, like what data is going where, and discover these things. So I get that the first thing is like, it's a dangerous premise to pool data, but it enables a lot if you can store everything in a separate thing behind big walls. It's a lot safer, but yeah, you lose all the interoperability that exists in that space. So there are certainly things that we have to take into account, but in terms of progressing in the research in that space, there's a lot of things that we'll still figure out, right? Ways that we can maybe make things safer in that regard, because for a part, it's still an ongoing research project as well in those kind of areas. But yeah, there are things that we can do already, and there are more things that we can find out there in the future. So I have good hopes that will be a very small to a non-existing problem, and it will be a lot safer. At least you'll have a lot easier control, because I don't know who Facebook gives my data access to, right? So if I have it, I at least have these receipts. So make it more clear to the user what their data is doing on the web, and I think in that regard that it might even be better from a user perspective than what we have today.
Thank you, Ruben. I think you are right about the risks. I think we can have more discussion about this. Just if you all agree, I have several messages on Zoom here. So if it's okay, I shall. Lucas has a question. Let us finish with the questions in the room. Lucas, and then I'll start reading if people don't raise hands to ask their questions by themselves.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. So I'm glad to see that the Flemish government is taking initiative. Is there any other project that's gaining traction or is quite big, where solid, like what is the biggest example of a solid application?
I'm not always aware of all the projects that are happening, because I'm mainly doing like technical research, so I sometimes catch things here and there in meetings. I know the BBC did stuff with Solid. I know the Flemish VRT, like the, how do you say it in English? The TV company things are also doing research in there. We have a company in Ghent that's shaping up to be a pod provider, and they're helping other companies use these solid technologies and connect that way. So,
So this is all in how to say, an organizational way, but like, what about actual social media?
Well, from social media, there are some projects, mostly enthusiast project. Enthusiast project. Now, I think, don't take me on my word, because I'm working on the technology. I'm not always looking around that much at who is doing what. But yeah, it's more of a like how can we get users involved in this space, and from a company standpoint, it's sometimes easier because they have the means to like set up pods for their users and stuff. Yeah, so I can't give you a definitive answer.
Okay,
on that one.
just a small side question. So recently with the Twitter things, you had Mastodon. You probably heard a lot about it.
Yes.
What is your opinion on? Well, basically, this would be an ideal application for Solid, right? So why did people go to Mastodon, and why not Solid? And as another question to that, Mastodon kind of it didn't fail necessarily, but it didn't win because it was too complex. Why would Solid be better?
Well, Solid is more like where your data goes to, right? It's up to you to build the application on top of it. So depending on how you approach this, I can't give you. I can't say why it would be better or not, but at least like Mastodon, as far as I understand it, also they have like your tweets are also stored on a Mastodon server. You can move your account, you can take some followers with you, but your tweets remain there, right? So, and yeah, it still had some growing pains as well, I think. And not forget a lot of internet technologies that that we're used to now also had their growing pains at the start. So in that sense, like it's not like it's going to give you an equal interface probably at the start, because if you take Facebook from like 10 years ago, you also wouldn't have the same interface and stuff, but you can have more interesting interactions happen. And it's mainly also not inside of one, but inside of many applications that these interactions really come to fruition. Because if you have one social media application and you have another one, well, these two might be able to interconnect, and maybe, well, I cannot see your special smiley faces that you add, but I can see your likes because that's something that I can also read, and I can see your comments because that's something that I can also read, and your blog posts are just URIs, so that one I can just port to my pod and to my application, and if you have this URI, well, you can get the text from out of there and show it. So it's not really as well that we need like this one killer app. It's more like this ecosystem of apps that can interoperate. I think that's the strongest part there, because one app that takes over the whole thing is kind of not what we're trying to avoid. You can do that, but it's not necessary per se. As if we can get an ecosystem with different apps that can interact in some ways, that's a more interesting prospect, at least in my eyes, than having one app that now changes Twitter, because, well, you will have the same problem maybe. Well, the data might be stored on your pod, but the app ecosystem might,
Okay, thank you.
So I couldn't stop you, but the answer is on the chat. I wanted to say that it's very nice. One of the Mastodon code developers who works here, actually, Antoine, is connected from the beginning. That's wonderful. But so it will come to discuss. We will come to discuss about it. But let me go in sequence, if you agree. I would like to read the long question/comment by Zagogin. If I understand right, the idea is that these data pods are decentralized, yes, and ideally individuals would host them for themselves and perhaps friends, yes.
Yes.
Family or otherwise choose to use a trusted pod for storage, yes. Given you have users who aren't interested in hosting their own pods or don't have the knowledge, interest to become a member of a privacy-focused group that has their, hold on a moment because it's very long, their interests at heart, how can you stop early adopters, for example, big companies, we have this problem, who have the resources to store such information from providing such services and slapping T's and C's or other limitations that reintroduce the problem by going over the top of the solution. Great talk, by the way, really enjoyed it. It is true what the person says.
Yeah. But so, yeah, that last one, it's a difficult thing, because indeed large companies do have the infrastructure for that, and that might also be a nice kickstart. But it's also a bit the solution lies in the specifications that provide the interoperability, right? Because if you conform to the spec, well, even if your pod is hosted on some other bigger platform, these interactions should still be the same. If you comply the spec, you should be able to pull out all your data just by like getting these documents out according to the spec. But in terms of like who can access and read data, I'm not. I don't know a lot about that space, so I'll not make any comments on that here. But like, it's always a bit of a difficult thing, because now we get a lot of things for free because we pay with data in some sort. Now, if you can host your own pod, like you might pay €4 per month, for example, for your server to be online somewhere that hosts your pod. But like, if you want it for free, well, then maybe you can say like, I want to pay with my data like I used to, but it's a choice that you can give people, right? It's not something that you should decide, like, if you want to be part of this, well, you can, but we'll host things for free, but you pay with your data and we'll do what we want with it. Well, we can give like alternative things there, but if people are not really interested in that, well, we cannot really stop them from doing what they want. So it's, yeah, it's a proposition. You have the choice.
I jump in again because we have to fight a very fundamental human need, which is hunger rising for lunch. Still, I have to say that there are 2/3 of the original people still connected. This is very nice. And we still have messages in the chat, so we should go through them. Of course, they will also be included in the recording, but let me go quickly. Antoine, the one I mentioned, who is knowledgeable deeply in Mastodon, wrote a first comment question. Facebook, Google, Airbnb, Uber, the data is their business. How do you plan to convince them to stop storing the data and use pods instead? No way. I can answer very briefly. Continue. That's okay? You are covered by my answer.
Yeah, well,
they will not be convinced. It's not in their business model.
But yeah, it's also a bit like if you have these big companies, they already have the data oftentimes. So that aspect of of what's being offered by Solid is less interesting for them because, well, more data, well, they already have probably a lot of the data that they actually want. But if you can have these newer incentives, like working together against bigger companies by pooling data in some sort, you have like a bigger push there where these bigger companies be like, yeah, but we might also maybe like to take some data out of that pool. But if you don't participate, well, maybe you won't be let in there. So there are some incentives there, at least for starting companies to adopt that, that thought, yeah.
Yeah, so it has to be, there should be a grouping of efforts, and there should be trust inside the grouped members involved. So there was another question saying, I wonder about one other thing. If we control our data pods, we are just controlling the access at specific time. We still do not stop the data storage by external companies. They can access our pods at specific times and still have the data in their databases after we revoke the accesses.
Yeah. So on that part, at one part, if you store the data yourself, well, you can do it now as well. So that's law and regulations. Like often you have the GDPR now that you have to conform to some rules. At least now, if someone takes the data and says, you know what, we'll store a copy locally, one, you'll have a receipt, so you know that there's some data lingering there maybe, or at least that they have access. And if at one point you say, like, this receipt is done, like, I revoke this access, or you say, like, maybe I'll give you access, but only for 1 month, for example, and I don't want my data to be used for advertising purposes, for example. Like I have specific conditions in which I want this data to be used. Some some type of usage policy that you can add to this receipt and say, like, these are my conditions for this receipt. We both sign it potentially, and then I give this data to you. If that's backed by some kind of legislation like GDPR or something similar, then if they do something with their data that I did not sign for, well, I have this receipt, you have the receipt, and we can, I can prove if somehow it comes out that you did other stuff with that data, like, hey, that was not what I signed for. And maybe if you want, you can put the receipts on a blockchain or just keep track of it yourself wherever you have it. Like that can be publicly shown. Like, I gave you this receipt and you did not follow the terms of the agreement. So maybe in a legislative way, we can do stuff with that there, but. Yeah, the thing is, there are options always, right? It's not like all the answers have already been written out, but in any case, it allows for a lot of options that we can still discover and work out.
Indeed. In the chat as well, if we have regulation, you have to trust that the contract you signed with the provider will be respected. If this is a provider who is a humongous GAFAM company and then you want to sue them, who is going to pay the bill anyway? You have to eventually trust.
At some point.
That's the problem. Anyway, so there is another question by Vasiliki, or comment, I didn't go that far. Saying you can see in the receipt that Facebook got access to X data, but is there a way to monitor who got access to the data group, to the data through Facebook?
Well, I know of some research, for example, on safe execution spaces, like where you give access to some data, they do some things with it in a space that you can control, that it's actually done in a way that you have given access to. I think at some point, indeed, the trust also has to come in and be like, yeah, you know what, if we both sign this, I trust you to do the right thing with it, and if not, if I ask you to like only use this data for internal stuff, maybe, I don't know. There are possibilities there, surely, that can be worked on, both from a technological and a legal standpoint, right? Because the legal system is also still evolving in that space, the data space. So there's also some opportunities there if we can get a big enough movement, for example, that they could follow through with some of these concepts as well. I'm not that knowledgeable about that, but there are certainly, again, opportunities there, and I cannot give you all the answers right now, sadly.
Great, thank you. There is a technical comment on Mastodon, coming back to Lucas. Mastodon and Diaspora and all other federated social networks, as far as Antoine knows, he says, duplicate the data of the users in all the pods of the network. It doesn't answer the question of why they succeeded or appear to succeed better. The mechanisms behind that replication is quite different from Solid. And then coming back to the original question by Zagogin, an answer in the chat is that what Google did with Gmail is exactly that. Emails are decentralized like Solid, but in the end, most of the emails are stored in the Google data center. That is true. So afterwards, I don't know what to say. There are questions by Maurizio. Is the separation of data from the application with distribution controlled by the owner something that could or should be enforced by legislation, for example, to be included in GDPR, or a new piece of legislation, or would that be too much of a burden and perhaps impacting negatively most financially weaker entities? I mean, should this be enforced by regulation?
So I know in Flanders what they're planning is at least, the plan was to have one pod for each citizen, so that you had this space where data could be stored. Now, the thing is, indeed, if you want to enforce that, you have to assume that everybody has some place where they can store that data, right? And right now, that is certainly not yet the case. So if we could get to a place where we could assume that people have access to these things, then we could maybe start thinking about these things. Like now, most of the people expect you to have a cell phone, right? And there's a lot of things that rely on you having a cell phone in your pocket to work and to do things. There are some legacy systems, but most will rely on your smartphone. And for example, for a data pod, could be the same thing, that once we get up to speed enough that we can reasonably expect people to have a data pod present, or that there's some fallback mechanisms, for example, or stuff that you could pull it out later and put it in your data pod, for example. Then we could start thinking about that. But that remains to be seen as to how the space evolves and what happens in there. But now it would be way too early to at least to impose something like that. But if we can see how the ecosystem evolves, and it turns out to be a very stable and good working ecosystem, then that might certainly be one of the options there. So,
okay, so what I suggest, while thanking very much everybody who came here, who connected remotely, the speaker, while informing everybody that tomorrow we have a different lecture on the decentralized web given by Patrick here. Check the abstract on Indico. The slides of today are on Indico. I have taken the liberty to put also in the material our efforts that lasted for 2 years, now not continued based on a CERN-IT decision to evaluate SOLID here at CERN. We had, for example, thanks to a brilliant student of mine who worked zero cost to CERN for his master's thesis, an extension based on solid pods that attach comments to any Indico event. So if we had put this in production and if you had your solid pod, you could have written there, brilliant, rubbish, I don't trust anything or anybody, whatever. So you can go through that URI very easy, solid.cern.ch. There are 52 presentations and other events. Lucas has also given a beginner's presentation on linked data. And look forward to see you all here or remotely tomorrow for this larger scope of the decentralized web lecture. Thank you so much.